Hello and welcome to episode 53 of the AutoTalk Weekly Wrap. And today we've got a bit of an interesting structure. We are going to break down an interview I have done. Well, when I say breakdown, we're going to watch live and my industry friends will comment on it. An interview I did earlier this week with Transport Minister Michael Wood. Now, if you're wondering why AutoTalk magazine is out a little bit late this time, it is going out today. That's the reason behind it. The minister with the flooding and so forth earlier in the week was incredibly busy, and so my interview got put back a few times. I think we started it being late last week and finally got through to it on Wednesday afternoon. But glad that he finally got there. I don't feel I was being put off. It was just a case of timing and floods and Parliament does things, that kind of stuff. But joining me today to analyse this is my usual co-host, Mr. Graeme Macdonald. Thanks for joining me, Graeme.
Morning, Richard. Morning, team.
How are things out west? Are they starting to dry out a little bit?
Well, I'm watching this amazing thing that happens this morning. We're actually seeing a star in the sky for the first time that we haven't seen for a little while now. It's called the sun. So yeah, we're ringing everything out and back onto square one again in the dealership. It's been a crappy week to sell cars, that is for sure.
Well, we got flooded up here in Mangawhai, and my poor wife with her mother and our daughter got stuck in Whangarei. Almost ended up in a rural shed Airbnb before managing to get through the flooding at Ruakaka back to their house, but not back to my mother-in-law's house, but not home. But you'll be pleased to hear that having had that happen, I immediately called up a friend in the industry and ordered a yet-to-be-released electric four-wheel drive ute. I figured that was the way to go. So you've gotten rid of your ute. I've put in an order for one. So there you go.
We're going to have words about that when you get it stuck in the next bit of floodwater, Richard. But I'll save that for a later time.
Well, let's just.
I know.
We currently have a BYD 803, right? The BYD 803, the battery in that is rated to be able to be submersed in water for 30 minutes before you start getting close to having issues.
Yeah, you try that then. I'll watch.
What happens when you submerge a Ford Ranger motor in water for 30 minutes?
Well, how far can you take a Ford Ranger up until the snorkel reaches the sky?
And how many of them have snorkels fitted?
In Auckland, lots. The ones that drop the kids off to school are the ones with the snorkels. And let's be honest, that is the truth, right?
Don't let the Deputy Prime Minister hear about that.
Yeah, a small little segue to that. I sold my Ranger about 2 months ago, and the chappie I sold it to, and this is a genuine ute buy, he sent me photos yesterday from Bluff, eating Bluff oysters in the Ranger with a caravan on the back, with all his hunting stuff in the back as well. Happy chappie. Now, there's a happy Ranger owner, as there should be.
It was an impressive Ranger, and that Ranger, and I won't say too much, did some quite impressive four-wheel driving for a two-wheel drive ute when it was with us. So hopefully he's enjoying it. Now, hopefully set to enjoy some time away with a caravan soon is our freshly retired friend in Wellington, David Crawford. Thanks for joining us, David.
Good morning. As a ute owner, I can attest to snorkels and caravans.
And you live in the city as well.
The hut's not really the city, is it?
Well, no, Eastbourne's out, in the boondocks. So
yes, work. And how are you, David? I gather that today's kind of the last day for the iconic MIA office in the hut. It's done.
It is. It's in the process of being moved, which is a concrete milestone that has been reached. And I'm feeling pretty happy about that and relieved because it's been a long time in the planning. So, I'm starting to relax and I'm just now a mere advisor.
Fantastic. When do you hand back your drive car?
Is that a polite term for gardening leave there, David?
Well, not. I'm tempted to say I wish, but it's not.
Now, when do you hand back your nice industry drive car? That's probably the important thing.
Well, I just picked up my last work car, which will go back in August because I'm going to be doing a little piece of contract work once I get the terms of reference for that. end of June. It's a nice little thing. It's the Ford Focus ST line hybrid.
Yep.
Yeah. It's a really good little car, and I think it's could be quite a popular model out there.
It's sad that Ford is exiting that kind of segment of the market because they make some fantastic driving cars. There's no doubt about that. Those small European Fords are just some of the best of their type in the market.
No, it certainly holds the road, and drives nicely. I haven't done the typical blokey thing that I normally do, which is the first thing I do is lift the bonnet, look at all the specs, everything. But it's been raining, the last couple of days. In fact, I was just complaining to my siblings who live in West Auckland that, like them, our lawn hasn't dried out for about 16 months.
Yeah.
That's West Auckland for you.
Ours remains soggy up here too. Right, let's get on with the plan for this show. So no news this week. We're going to pull up on the screen this video, and basically what's going to happen is these guys are watching this for the first time. I think Graham's heard a little bit of audio from it, and they are going to react. We may skip through it bits if it gets a bit boring. It's only about 16, 17 minutes long. These guys, if they want to discuss something further, they'll call stop, we'll pause it, and have a crack at what the minister has said. Good or bad. Let's not make it all bad, guys. Let's comment on the good stuff as well. It's important that we're balanced in these things. So I'd like to introduce to the stream, not live, Transport Minister Michael Wood. Brilliant. Right. Minister, thanks for joining me today. Now, let's start off, I guess, on a bit of a positive note here, and we are talking about the clean car discount predominantly today. And I guess the start of this is, I guess you could argue that the whole thing as it's been structured has been a little too successful. I mean, that's ultimately become the problem, hasn't it?
Well, we first announced our confirmation to move forward with a clean car discount about 2 years ago. It was May of 2021. And then the full scheme came into effect from the 1st of April last year, so about 13 months ago. And at both of those junctures, we had people who doubted whether this would be an effective scheme to encourage Kiwis into cleaner vehicles and to encourage the industry to shift the makeup of vehicles in the fleet. It's been extraordinarily successful on both.
Just touching on that thing where he mentions the dates, I'm not sure if there's anyone watching who are a little bit addicted to Parliament TV like I am, but there's been some ongoing arguments in question time between Simeon Brown and the Minister over... The Minister, when answering Simeon's questions in regards to how many Teslas or so forth have been registered, the Minister keeps on quoting figures, and I'm not sure if he's attempting to keep the number lower that relate to only the date past the start of the full seat clean car discount, not that extension at the start where it was just electric vehicles. So that's been an interesting one.
Yeah, and to be fair, Richard, to you, I think that's a little bit mischievous because... The Motor Industry Association has supported the rebate scheme in principle and in practice, more so than the used car sector, because for the new cars, at the rates that they were proposing, this is a really classic economic instrument for environmental management. Set the pricing signals right at the point of sale, and then you start to see some changes. And we did see the pickup, the uptick, I think is the term. The uptick started when there were rebates for just BEVs and PEVs. And the rate of sale of BEVs and PEVs just kept upticking past 1 April. It didn't really change a lot, and I've got some graphs on that. But what did change 1 April was, of course, the massive registrations of vehicles getting fees, particularly in February and March, and then their drop-off and slow recovery post that, to the point where they probably recovered to about 85% of the long-run average. And we will expect, it's probably come up later in the discussion, but we'll expect those big fee vehicles, or vehicles that attract a big fee, will take another hit post June. It'll be interesting to see if the stock in country gets all sold, PDI'd and registered in June ahead of those changes. But the rebates started in was it 1 July 2021? Yes.
21.
So,
21.
so I guess the basic question there is: was that a deliberate move in question time to kind of downplay the amount that had been paid out to certain sectors of vehicles? But who knows? I mean, it could also just simply be an innocent mistake or a clarification issue.
No, sorry, Richard. It's a deliberate attempt to downplay it because Simeon Brown's rhetoric around ute tax and robbing the poor to pay the rich.
Being one of the worst markets in the world for low and zero emission vehicles to being one of the best markets in the world.
I'm not sure we're one of the
once you
worst
put Norway to
before
one side, we are one of the best markets in the world.
I was going to say, where did we get that from?
Now. We're getting up to around 50 to 60% of vehicles coming into fleet now on a month-to-month basis, being at the low or zero emissions end of the market. And so, yeah, you can make the argument there.
This bit really irritates me. One of the dirtiest. Sure, our average fuel economy for new and used vehicles as they first enter the fleet aren't flash, but by my goodness, they're not the worst in the world, and not even the worst in the OECD.
Yeah.
I was going to take another point to that. New Zealand doesn't manufacture motor vehicles, and so if you eliminate the nations that actually do, and all the financial benefits or other structures that are around that, for a nation that does not manufacture cars, I would imagine New Zealand rates reasonably highly in terms of its overall picture for emissions in the fleet. Let's just for a minute sit back in most of Africa or some of the Asian nations that don't manufacture, or most of South America. Clearly, they don't count for this one somewhere. I think that's bullshit.
That it's been overly successful in a sense. It has exceeded expectations. We were confident it would lead to an uptake in low and zero emissions vehicles, but it has well exceeded that. And because we have consciously structured the scheme to be self-financing, that does mean that we are having to look at making these adjustments. Although I will say that at the time we announced the scheme, we did say that probably every 1 to 2 years, we would need to do a recalibration to make sure that the scheme both stayed fiscally sustainable, but also that we were continuing in a staged way to push up the ambition of the scheme so that we keep making progress.
I almost feel like they waited too long. Do you think the current result as it stands has been entirely down?
Waited too long. They started the review technically in September and then just stopped it. They just got busy with other things. And come January, they realised that the sales of new electric vehicles, the Atto 3 and Model Y, you look at the sales of those from August through to December, they were through the roof and almost caught up to the sales of new hybrid vehicles. And Graeme, you can probably correct me on the stats for used, but my understanding is that used vehicles come in and almost all hybrid or a BEV. There's not a lot of ICE coming in anymore. Is that correct?
I think, no, not quite, David. There's still a lot of conventional ICE stuff coming in, although when you look at the top-selling vehicles, the Aqua, number 1, Prius, number 2, Corolla, well, most of the Corollas coming through are now Corolla hybrids of some sort, so they make up a big proportion, but there's still a lot of ICE stuff, regular ICE stuff coming through as well. But if I want to rewind the tape for a second and go back to the points about the inception of the scheme, the single biggest issues they had around the scheme's creation was ignoring all advice, and I mean all advice, and announcing the scheme prior to its implementation in the first place. So what we saw happen was the price of used, I'm talking for the used industry here, the price of used leaves, for example, in Japan went up by about $3,000 or $4,000 within a matter of hours. The price of hybrid vehicles went up, not by the same sort of proportion, but at that next part of the scheme. But the officials, or at least the minister or the minister's advisors, steadfastly ignored all advice to if you're going to put a rebate on these vehicles, do it now to avoid the gaming of the system. But what happened, of course, they didn't listen, and there was immense gaming of the system in the first few months prior to the hybrids being brought back on board as well.
It's interesting from the news side. We saw in a lot of cases the opposite thing, because the pricing was more often closer to that limit and was forced down by the subsidy. I almost wonder if there should have been more work done into maybe stage limits for various types of vehicles or caps.
Yeah, Yeah, that was the major difference between the new and used sectors. To be fair to the used sector, there was always concern that the rebates would go offshore, and that was just a sure bet that was going to happen. Not so with it. Yeah, and they did, but not so with new. So with new, the effect was to influence allocation of vehicles to New Zealand. And it's model availability and allocation that has been a success. The question I haven't been able to answer, you asked the minister, this has been a successful intervention. Question I have to ask is, with the Atto 3 coming and the Tesla Y coming, they were coming whether there was a scheme or not. Would we still see an uptake near the rate that we've got with the current rebates? And the answer is, I'm not sure for the Y and the Atto whether it would really affect it, because they've been priced in a market that people want to buy at that price. I think, though, for the other brands, it has helped.
I think it has. It has had a big difference, and I think the thing that measures that is, go look at the trend on Model 3 sales. Model 3s, since if Model 3 was available in volume prior to the free rebate coming in, and it's been available in volume since the rebate has been in, and Model 3 sales just keep on growing, and I still think that a lot of that comes down to the rebate, because basically you could drive out of a Tesla dealership with a Model 3 for under $60,000. And I think that's whereas before it was just kind of that step too far. I also think you've got to look at that sector of the market too, and that there is a lot of people shifting from the used market to the new market in that segment, and for a lot of them, that big chunk of money is part of the reason they psychologically will do it, but also can fiscally do it.
Yeah, and I think at the end of the day, $8,500 rebate, paid twice the amount to buy a BEV compared to its ICE model, but I still got a bargain. I got $8,500 back. That's what's driven this, and it's been more successful for the new car sector than we anticipated.
To people making the choice to buy more efficient vehicles, or do you think there's an element of also people potentially deferring the purchase of higher emitting vehicles based on, there's been some uncertainty, particularly with the election coming up, around the status of what this will be on an ongoing basis? I mean, do you think potentially people are sitting on utes longer, utes being the biggest thing, rather than going out and replacing them with other options? Because as much as I'd love to think there are, the ability to replace those vehicles with the lower emissions options it is still tricky.
You always.
And I stand by my statement there. I still believe there are plenty of fleets and plenty of private owners who have simply deferred ute purchases for a very long time on the basis that they don't believe this policy will last the election.
And it'll be interesting, Richard, for me to hear the minister's answer, because the new vehicle sector is really clear on this one. There are not a lot of alternatives for light commercial vehicles at the moment that meet the requirement. And so they feel particularly hard done by is the sentiment that has been fed back to the MIA office that I'm aware of.
I'm not sure you're going to get the answer at this point, but you will get I push them harder on it further in the interview, so let's carry on.
Let's get a bit of purchasing behaviour around the edges, and you'll see that, for example, just before or just after we make a change to the scheme, you'll see people trying to get in more quickly or holding off a little bit to see what happens. But in general, I have just zero doubt at all that the scheme has led to a fundamental shift in consumer behaviour, and also the supply of cleaner vehicles into the market. You can effectively graph the volumes of clean vehicles which are getting registered in New Zealand. And after the scheme came into effect, initially on the 1st of July 2022, just with a discount for EVs, and then the full scheme on the 1st of April last year, you see massive increases which have now been sustained month on month. So I think we're seeing a sustained shift.
Hold on for a second on that one.
But that's also part of a sustained shift.
I was going to say that from the used sector's point of view, I think too much emphasis is being given on the success of the scheme. And granted, I accept that for the new sector, David, it has been successful for the reasons you've outlined. But new, it's just to as anything else, it's a happy accident. As you say, the majority of the market in Japan is increasingly hybrid. Not BEV, actually, more hybrid with a smattering of PHEV. And it's just, I suppose, that the golden time where that stock's finally become available in Japan at a reasonably affordable prices. The Aqua, which we know is the one-for-one seller, reached that point where enough Aquas were tipped into the second-hand market at an affordable price to make them an attractive proposition for importers. Same with things like the Corollas. Ironically, the Leaf, which is the poster child for the used import EV, the numbers of those haven't really increased at all through this scheme because we just simply are up against availability. There are not the numbers of
200 a
used
month,
Leafs in the market.
month in, month
Yeah.
out.
That's it, and that's not likely to change out of Japan because they just don't make them. And so the so-called success of the scheme, I don't believe in the used import market has been driven by rebates. It's been driven by the sheer availability of the stock that's now in the market in Japan that we can purchase. And the rebate's just a nice little, and I shouldn't really say this in public because, of course, this doesn't lend itself well to the argument that the used import hybrid should have rebates anyway. But the honest truth is, for most purchasers, it's just a nice little happy add-on rather than an influencer for their decision.
Yeah, and from a used car sector, you are more nimble than us, and with working, than the new sector with shorter timeframes and the ability to pick and mix. Not so with the new vehicle sector. So what this scheme did for the new vehicle sector was help brought forward allocation decisions that they would have otherwise had to wait for.
Yep.
As well, there is only one direction for the vehicle market here in New Zealand and internationally, and that is the increasing preponderance of low and zero emissions vehicles. And bringing this scheme forward, we're making sure that New Zealand's not left behind, that it's cheaper for people to access those vehicles, and that we don't become a dumping ground for the world's dirtiest vehicles, which is what would be happening.
Oh, come on.
Dumping ground.
Really?
This really irritates me. It's a Julian Genta and it's officials. Officials keep saying we're going to be a dumping ground. And for the new vehicle sector, it works on a derived demand. And I use the analogy: think of a supermarket, and you've got two shelves stocked with items. One shelf disappears at the end of the week, the other one doesn't. So you restock the one that's above, and then eventually you make more room for it because it's the more popular one. That's what happens in the new vehicle sector. It's a 2 to 3 year rolling average, changing, working with model variations and things like that. What sells gets restocked. What doesn't sell gets less bought in. Dumping ground? You just got to be kidding me. There are some models that come out that are around the fringes, but we've never been a dumping ground for new vehicles. Not in the way that they allege. To me, that's almost libelous comments.
What can I add to that, David?
Now, let's go back to the changes. I think everyone in the industry who actually keeps an eye on these things knew that there was always going to be a change. It was written into the original legislation. How long was this change in the works, and what kind of consultation was undertaken with industry?
We've been looking with a bit of focus at this since about the beginning of this year. We've been obviously month on month carefully monitoring what's coming in to the scheme by way of revenue and what's going out by way of costs. And so it was apparent by the beginning of this year that we did need to address that because the volumes of clean vehicles have just been so high. So I've been working that through with officials, but also engaging in careful and trusted consultation with key industry bodies. And I just acknowledge them that we've been able to go to organisations like MIA, VIA, Drive Electric, and talk about these issues, get their advice and feedback, and try and formulate a good and balanced policy. I'd say that
did they listen?
Started talking to me.
I find it interesting that they consulted with Drive Electric because it's very much a lobby group for one side of the issue, I guess.
Well, and they only have a few of the manufacturers represented on it. They are a ginger group to advocate for electric vehicles as opposed to all technology for low emission vehicles, which is fine. I mean, that's what they are. Did they listen? Well, when I say we, sorry, the Motor Industry Association, it wrote to the minister in September because that's when they understood the review was being initiated. So the Motor Industry Association set out some very clear expectations of what changes it thought would be helpful, and in particular the timeline for changes to take effect. Because unlike the used sector, for the new sector, 2024 stock for the year for 2024, all the order commitments are being finalised now, if they're not already being finalised. So the ability for the new vehicle sector to change, because the whole parameters have changed, there's a lag. And that's why that sector wanted to have an early discussion around it, but it went quiet. I just think they got a bit smug, really, and then suddenly all these sales went and they ran out. And by the way, the 100 million that they put in will only see the fund to really the end of June, about halfway through July.
The beginning of this process, I was very clear that we didn't want really dramatic shifts here. We needed to make a series of balanced changes to the scheme to make sure that it broadly retains its fiscal neutrality, but continues to provide strong incentives to make the fleet cleaner and get cleaner, cheaper to run vehicles into Kiwis' hands.
Now let's talk about one particular issue around the change in the consultation with industry. And look, we've done plenty of stuff on AutoTalk now and live streams and stories about changes that the industry didn't get, and some that they wanted that have been done, and or things that have been kept. For one, keeping the 80,000 limit was welcomed. But one specific issue that has been raised is my understanding is the industry campaigned pretty heavily with you for an extended time frame for any changes. I mean, this is a very short turnaround from a commercial perspective. I mean, is that what you wanted? I've heard from around circles that potentially you went to cabinet asking for a longer lead time on this and it was declined. What can you tell us around that?
Well, look, we did have good engagement with industry, and they raised a number of points. And as is always the case with these things, sometimes you can address that, and sometimes you can't. So the cap, as you mentioned, was one of those areas where the industry, for a range of reasons, said it was important to keep it where it was. And I thought overall that was a compelling argument. In terms of the lead time, I very much accept why the industry would have wanted a longer lead time. There are clearly strong arguments for that. And we canvassed a range of options in the work that I did with officials and also in the conversation I had with my cabinet colleagues. We never go into detail about what happened within those cabinet meetings, but it's fair to say we looked at a range of options there. In the end, we had to try and make a decision which gave a bit of lead time and visibility to people, but there is also a fiscal component here. So we've had to inject an additional $100 million into the scheme in order to make sure that we do keep it sustainable. Had we had a longer lead time, it simply would have required an additional investment. So, look, I get it. I understand why the industry would have preferred a longer lead time. There are arguments for that, but we've got to balance that ultimately with the fiscal situation and how much we're willing to put into the scheme.
How is it a fiscal problem if ultimately the...
Yeah, he was using, so based on my years working in government and advising ministers, 22 of them before the MIA, the body language I'm reading there is, he understood, but he lost out, and the sums were frightening. So the finance minister did not want to put money. My understanding is the finance minister did not want to put money into the fund. It's a bit of a poisoned chalice for them. But because it's climate change and they've deleted some other climate change initiatives in transport, they have to keep this one going. But they have other priorities in the budget for the money. So 100 million was all they could get. They did the sums on when it would run out, and that is how the lead time was calculated. The new vehicle sector is at least comforted that the minister heard and understood the rationale for why a longer lead time for that sector is important. Conversely, I don't know what a long lead time would have done for the used car sector.
Well, I guess you could argue and say if the scheme is going to run out of money with an additional 100 million on the 1st of July, then so be it. And politics, as we know, is a tricky game to play. I understand their hesitance to not put any further money into the tin at that point. But with lead times, you could also work backwards. Why did it take so long to come to that conclusion? If the industry, so from a used perspective, if we knew about this back in January or February, we could have planned for it. Our stock mix could have been planned for. At the moment, it's about a 3-month lead time to get stock to market out of Japan, and the shipping industry crisis we're having. And then it's not just getting the car here, it's getting cars prepared and sold and registered. And that really is a minimum 3-month window. So if it had just been announced a month or two prior, we could have possibly mitigated the stock we're bringing in, the promises we've made to and assurances to customers. But it's not about the implementation date, it's about the lead time that we're given. And I don't know, David, how many more months difference it would have made to you if this had been a signal back in January rather than when it was a couple of weeks ago.
Every month is important, and here's the rub. My intel indicates that all of the cabinet paper and briefings were ready to go up in March, and so it took some time because of cabinet priorities and limited sitting weeks and other bits and pieces for it to actually get the full cabinet. And then there was a problem with weather events and other things that came in and delayed that. But if it had been March and a decision had been made by then, that would have ameliorated some of the concerns of the new vehicle sector and probably would have dealt quite nicely with the used car sector. But every week they left it just compounds for the new vehicle sector.
I think we can take some heart then that the minister did at least have that on board and was, I guess, trying for the industry or for that way, but bigger things were at play by the sounds of it.
Yeah. And look, I think the new vehicle sector's taken some comfort from that, but we'd describe it as cold comfort.
Fund is going to be self-funding because won't that money come back one day? So really isn't it just loaning the money to the scheme? It's not like it's money spent as such?
Yeah, that's right, it will, but it still ultimately is money that has to come in the current moment out of the Climate Emergency Response Fund. So, which is how we've...
This says to me that they don't expect the fund to ever pay itself back. That's my read on it.
It's also electioneering too.
It's a loan coming. It's a loan coming from a pre-budgeted fund. So,
well, the Senate will also say that it's get cut off at the knees come election time if there's a change of government. We're also well aware that it becomes just a big black line on the checkbook. Been there, done that, spent that.
But it becomes National's hole in the checkbook, not Labour's hole in the checkbook.
Yeah. I know. I expect if Labour get back in, that they'd try and make a fist of getting some of that money back. But if National get in, it'll just be written off. It would be my guess.
We put the initial $300 million into the scheme, and this additional $100 million has come from there. So yes, while that is the case that gets repaid at the end of the 10-year period that we envisage the scheme to run through the fiscal cycle, it still ends up being effectively a cost against the surf that we have to trade off against other investments that we would otherwise make there.
Now, the biggest issue that timeframe causes for the industry is actually more one for the customers, which you probably understand by now, and that the people, since COVID, there's been long supply chains on vehicles. There's plenty of people out there who've gone and done the right thing, ordered a hybrid or a low emissions vehicle. They will now not get that. They won't get that car till after July 1. They won't get the subsidy. Or if they're buying a higher emitting vehicle, they're going to pay more of a subsidy. Now, one brand alone, Toyota New Zealand's indicated that the cost to their customers, not the cost to Toyota New Zealand, but the cost to their customers, is going to exceed $30 million. I mean, what do you say to those customers, and also to, how do you feel the industry should be communicating with these customers to explain this? Because I think customers are, by and large, going to be blaming the dealers for that issue.
Yeah, look, I acknowledge those points, and that will always be the case to some extent when you have a change like this, unless you have an extremely long lead time. So we could have had a lead time, for example, of 6 months. That would have resulted in fewer of those cases, but there still would have been cases given some of the lead time for vehicles coming into the New Zealand market. So we just have to try and make a balanced decision there. Ultimately, the relationship will be between the dealer and the customer in terms of how they want to work through that. I suppose what I would have to say here is that we have signalled right from the beginning of the scheme that we would have these adjustments on a basis of every 1 to 2 years. We would need to review the scheme and make changes. So it isn't something we've just decided to come in and do. And look, overall, what I would say is that the good players in the market, including Toyota, have done really well out of the scheme. Toyota has been the brand which has sold the most cars, which have attracted the clean car discount. And
I'm gonna say something on this one. Is that I think if we look back and we discuss the theory that this was pushed back in regards to the consultation, and then they've decided not to potentially say invest another $100 million to stretch out that line further on what is theoretically a money that returns into the pot scheme, all they've done is transferred that cost to the public, because by not investing another 100 million as a loan and extending it out or getting that consultation done earlier, they're costing the public $100 million. And that to me is concerning, that they've done it in that way and they didn't see it that way. Now, I understand all the mechanisms behind it, but I think it's quite we're skipping over quite a serious issue for the public, I think.
I can just sort of hear Nero spitting into his cornflakes right about now at that comment. And part of me for saying this, but that just sounds like envy socialist politics at work there. Well, Toyota, you did quite well out of this, so smack your hand, you're going to pay it back.
But here's the rub, Graeme. Toyota didn't do well out of this. The customers did well out of this. None of the distributors have done well out of this. It's just helped them shift their model mix. The overall numbers of vehicles sold are consistent with previous years and are down this year. But
yes.
No, it's not. This is just garbage that he's talking about. And because the fee is a fee that customer pays, the rebate is a money that the customer gets. The distributor gets nothing other than a whole lot of administrative charges and the ability to incentivize people to buy less of this and more of that. But overall, they're not selling that much. And when you look at the amount of money that has been paid out, the company that's received the most money has not been Toyota. It's not been Toyota customers. The sector that's received the most money have been the Tesla customers. And good on BYD, they're starting to chase up the rear as well. And Toyota customers have done well, but the amount of rebate for hybrids is a lot less than for BEVs. And so the sums, it's the sums that are really important here. This is just political misinformation. I won't say anything stronger than that.
And I wonder there if he's talking about, he's not talking net. I mean, he's talking about money paid out by the scheme as opposed to net across money paid out versus money paid in as well. I imagine that companies like Toyota, by the time you look at money paid out versus money paid in, it's probably pretty much an even number across the vehicles sold by that brand.
Yeah, and then you look at a company like Ford, which is more predominantly utes and less other options, although they have some BEV options coming up. They probably would have paid, their customers would have paid more in fees than they've received in rebates. Toyota's probably neutral, or their customers are. We should always talk about their customers because remember, the discount is a customer-driven point of sale initiative. It is not an importer thing. So importers have paid nothing out of this.
The most dollars from the scheme since it became fully
serve.
Operational have gone to those people who have been purchasing Toyota vehicles. So, yep, I do get this point. But overall, those brands who have engaged positively in building cleaner vehicles to this state and continue to do that will
as in the money being paid out to Toyota customers.
Is that correct?
So what was your question,
the money being
Graham?
paid out to Toyota?
I wonder if he's talking across both new and used.
So he just stated that
new and used.
Well, I hope there's a separation there because I'm pretty sure if you'd run the numbers, just as you said, David, that Tesla customers have received the largest slice of subsidy of rebate overall in the scheme for new rather than Toyota.
Is that
especially given the lead times? And this has been Toyota's whipping point here is they've had the ability to market the stock on the basis of a rebate available, but they haven't managed to land and actually have the rebate being claimed by customers. So potential rebate, possibly, but the sales are all about the vehicle being landed and sold, not about the sale point.
David, do you think again that these are figures where he's starting the clock from when the full CCD came into play rather than the original EV only segment of it?
He could, but I also would like to be clear that Tesla customers bought a lot of vehicles from August, September, October, November, December. There were strong sales across the Model 3 and Model Y. So you add those up, that's quite a big market. They were lumpy before then, but the supplies become more consistent because of the factory from China, which is where most of the vehicles to New Zealand are coming from now. Previously, they were coming from other factories. So it's a supply factory logistical one, but the Tesla owners have done really well out of the scheme. There's no doubt about it. But if he was talking about Toyota new and used, then you add all of that up, but that's probably quite a chunk of money as well, I understand.
And just to be clear, we're talking about Tesla owners here simply as a classification. We're not attempting to use it as a slur, which certain politicians are almost attempting to do with that group.
And that's a really good point, Richard. That's a really good point, because the scheme was to incentivise the uptake and to accelerate the uptake. So if you are given a rebate and suddenly you say, yeah, okay, I'm going to push the button now as opposed to wait a few years, good on you. And good on the Tesla owners for doing it.
Yep, exactly.
Continue to do well, will continue to attract the discounts to their vehicles, and will continue to build their customer bases.
I guess the rub for a brand like Toyota is that they're one of the companies that's put in the effort and they've put in the investment. They've taken, some fairly brave choices to do things like dropping petrol models entirely from some of their popular model ranges. And now, ultimately, while those cars aren't necessarily getting penalties, they are stepping back in the scheme. It's a very tricky one. I mean, are you concerned at the way hybrids have been wiped out? And this is why Toyota is largely affected. They've gone very heavy into hybrids. Hybrids, particularly in the new market, have been largely wiped from the scheme in this shift. Does that continue at all? Do you not see hybrids as being part of the electrification process?
Yes, I do. It's important to say that hybrids haven't been wiped out. So, this isn't a scheme that's based on the categorisation of vehicles. It's a scheme that has always been based, since it fully came into effect, on the CO2 emissions and how we measure them. So while effectively the threshold for getting a discount or being in the neutral zone has become a little bit more ambitious, there will still be a lot of hybrid vehicles that are able to attract a discount. And certainly,
I think I'm about to strike him with the question you're about to say, David. Just hold on 10 more seconds.
Okay.
I can't think of any particular that will be attracting a fee. So we've always said this. We've always said that as we move along and we do these reviews, the purpose will be to, over time, make the scheme more ambitious. And I'll just go back to the conversations we had with industry when we set the scheme up. When there are a lot of doubters and a lot of knockers and they said it wouldn't work, well, it has worked. It's reduced the average emissions of vehicles coming into fleet by 14% over that period. And I think that by in a staged way, continuing to increase the ambition, smart, good players in the industry, they will respond as they have responded. And I think we'll keep getting cleaner stock coming in as a result.
You say a stage way. This was a fairly big jump. And when we talk about, these I can't remember the wording you used a minute ago, but you indicate, the step is reasonable. You think there's still plenty of hybrids that'll be within the system. That's not really the case, is it? I mean, if we take Toyota as an example, the Toyota Corolla Hybrid, a small hybrid hatchback, now falls outside of the rebate zone. If we take things like the Nissan X-Trail Hybrid, E-Force Hybrid, that's now into the penalty zone. So it feels like, I think a lot of people expected this thing to move incrementally. This has been a heck of a big jump.
Well, I would describe it as a moderate change.
David, carry on.
It would have been better for them to have said, okay,
let David begin.
The CO2 to drop to 120 grams per kilometre for the rest of 2023 and then 100 grams from 2024. That would have
you still would have
better.
kept in an admittedly small segment, but you still would have kept a small section of family-sized hybrids in the scheme. You probably would have
And
squeezed in maybe a RAV4 hybrid, but you would have at least still had some choice.
and the important point here is that we had lots of discussions with officials about protecting forward orders because of the logistical logjam of getting vehicles here and the long wait times. And guess where the long wait times are? It is on the vehicles that start to reduce the emissions, the hybrids in particular. And the hybrids are, from a mathematical point of view, a really, really important stepping stone to lowering emissions. And so if you can accelerate the uptake of hybrids now and in 2024, you get a bigger reduction in CO2 overall than if you were trying to go from ICE to BEV straight away, because of the price differential between ICE and BEVs. It's just unfortunate. We expected the change. We knew that 100 grams was on the cards, but you can bet your bottom dollar that new vehicle sector said, just stage it a bit.
Yeah,
As
I
I
mean,
say,
what would
there
have
will
been an
still be-
ideal, as I say, before he carries on, from the used sector, I think 100 is also a pretty tough target, although it does keep the Aqua in for the time being, and it does also keep the most of the Corolla Fielder hybrids in. So again, two very popular models from a rebate perspective. But then I guess we're looking at it now saying, gosh, that was a big jump. What happens at the next point? So if a Labour Green Te Pāti Māori coalition is a reality in October, the further tweak to the scheme will eliminate, within the used import industry anyway, if there's a further jump down at some point, will eliminate most of the current production in Japan, which just simply won't be able to meet a much lower target than that for a considerable period of time. So I just, the 100 is a very cynical take, I would have thought, on eliminating an awful lot of stock from a new perspective, and you'd argue deliberately so.
Yeah, and look, does that mean that the rate of sales of those new vehicle hybrids will slow down? It might do a little bit, and that's what would worry us if it did. But what's next? The next step is going to be a BEV and a PEV scheme. I can't see anything else getting a rebate after the next step, or it just phases out altogether.
A reasonable number of hybrid vehicles, and in fact, not a huge number, but a small number, in fact, of the most efficient petrol vehicles will still apply for a discount. So yeah, there's still a strong role for hybrids to play here. Bear in mind as well that we've paid particular attention here to the role that the
I struggled with these claims though, because what he's talking about is essentially asking everyone to fit into a small hatchback.
used market plays as well, and we've slightly increased the discount that will apply to used vehicles that apply to a discount. So it hasn't quite been all one-way traffic there. But as I say,
let's touch on that. It's $50 extra on a used electric car. That's I know free money, but it's not exactly.
Yeah.
If we look in regards to the most common model thing in the country that gets a rebate, the Toyota Aqua. How's that body language?
Oh, come on. Carmel Cipollone stood up in the House and talked about how the scheme is a great thing for lower income New Zealanders, giving them a greater rebate on the vehicles of choice. I'm like, $50, we can buy a 6-pack of Cody's with that.
And it's not going to change
really
one iota. We're not going to change one iota your ability to bring in more stock, because there is no more stock. Whereas for the new vehicle sector, there is, but the rebate's reduced. But I have to say this, Richard, the amount of the rebate that they reduced, they did listen to advice from our sector saying, don't reduce it by more than 20%. Otherwise, you'll start to really drive down the incentive to go for that zero emission sector.
Seen its rebate drop as well. And if we touch on the used market, one of their big issues is in regards to what they are seeing as a growing equity issue, particularly around family-sized vehicles in that space. And we had a look recently at the numbers of and the amount of CO2 coming out of used import hybrid people movers, so vehicles in that $10,000 to $20,000 band, very common in less affluent areas for larger families, combined households, and that's been pretty much wiped out. Those predominantly now are getting fees on them, not just a lack of rebates. Does that concern you as well, that those working families are going to have to go and finance significantly large amounts of money to get into a vehicle that's safe and capable of carrying. Let this segment run a little bit because I tackle
a couple of things there. The first is, of course, that to the extent that fees do apply to those vehicles, they only apply to those vehicles which are coming into market. They don't apply to vehicles which are already in the market and are bought and sold in the second-hand market, which is where most commonly our lower income households will get a vehicle from. So it's just important to make that distinction. Secondly, we do have a number of those...
I actually think from an industry perspective, that's actually not truly correct. And if you look, particularly since the Triple CFA, there's been a massive increase in applications for dealer finance because lower income households simply can't get bank finance anymore. So they're going to dealers because that's where they can finance their vehicles. And at that lower end of the market, when vehicles are coming in at that older end, they generally aren't going through the used market too many more times. These vehicles tend to have a relatively short shelf life. They don't cycle back round again too many times like, say, a heavily built ute or something does.
I think there are a lot of other things that are going on in terms of the financing market which have driven some of the behaviour there. And obviously it's been a period in which there has been a squeeze on some household budgets, which I think is probably having a bit of a knock-on effect there. But there is still a vibrant second-hand market that we have for vehicles. Many people, rather than walking into a dealer, will go onto Trade Me, will find someone in their city and find a vehicle. But I acknowledge that there are still those pressures that are there for people. But the
David.
Oh, sucks to be a dealer, right?
Well, yeah, and look, this is where I probably won't agree with you two, because when you look at the rate of vehicle ownership in New Zealand, it's now 860 vehicles per 1,000 people. It's higher than the USA. So the existing fleet in New Zealand is enormous. So there are options around that. So, I mean, he's making a valid point there. But I do get it that financing and other drivers are making that more difficult, which is just slowing the trade at the dealer end. And so when they're doing private-to-private sales, I think that the people who you're worried about are getting ripped off by unscrupulous sellers. You don't get the checks and the balances and the safety that you get by going through a dealer.
Yeah, well, you unpack that for a second. One of the issues, and you're quite correct, Richard, is the people mover market, and it sounds a bit unkind to say that, but you are correct. Those vehicles tend to have a shorter shelf life, and it's not because they're inferior vehicles, although they are
kids
older.
Are disgusting.
But we are. I'll be honest. We're not good on our gear here in New Zealand. We don't look after our cars particularly well here in New Zealand. And at that end of the market, as a trader, and I deal a lot in trade-ins and bits and pieces, consistently the vehicles that are the worst looked after and have the worst, if you like, shelf life are family vehicles. They just are. And it doesn't matter how you paint it, they're the ones you'd expect to come off the end of the line, so to speak, first, just because of the way they get treated and used. So what the minister's effectively advocating for is to extend the lifespan of these vehicles, which is completely counterintuitive to the idea of recycling vehicles through the fleet. So let's actually have an extension of the age of the vehicles in our fleet rather than trying to bring that age gap back down again, because that's all this does. And he's encouraging it in his comments. If ever there was a case where you either fail to understand or it's a let them eat cake attitude towards their constituents, show me.
And the emission rate reductions slows down, and the older, more polluting vehicles stay in the fleet for longer.
Yeah.
Yep. And look, and we're not talking about little bits here. What, remind me again, Graeme? What's the fee now on a Honda Odyssey?
Oh, I think an Odyssey was over $2,000. I didn't bring my little list in front of me here, Richard, but an Odyssey, used 2010, 2011 Odyssey, is just over $2,000 fee. Actually,
on a car that retails for what, $15,000?
Yeah, $14,000, $15,000. The Serena hybrid, I haven't got the calculation on the number, but even a Serena hybrid, which is kind of seen as the savior of a used vehicle people mover, it's affordable, at 171 grams, they now also attract a fee. In fact, I'm looking at my list here, everything, the Mazda Bianto, the Premacy, the Serena hybrid, the Esquire, the Estima hybrid. Would you believe the Estima hybrid now has a fee attached to it? The only one that really doesn't is the Toyota Sienta, and we may discuss that later, but that's maybe a 7-seater, but it sure ain't a Kiwi 7-seater.
Now, I discussed that with. I made that very clear to the minister. I can't remember if it was in the interview or after the interview that this Sienta is, because I've heard other people quote the Sienta as an option. It's not an option. It's a Corolla hatchback with a dicky seat. Let's be clear. It's a lovely vehicle. I like
Yes.
the Sienta. It's a lovely vehicle. When we were in Japan once at Toyota headquarters, my wife fell in love with one that had been wrapped in fur for a pet combo promotion. But it's not a family people mover. It'd be interesting to actually know what the loadability on that vehicle is. I mean, let's not get into the weight loading on some of these vehicles. They let's be blunt, they're probably in many cases not even ideal for the situations they're going to. Anyway, let's carry on.
Nature of this market and the nature of the clean car discount is that there is an ongoing shift to a greater provision of fuel efficient vehicles at a lower price, and that's across all types. So we do have a number of 7-seater vehicles, for example, which remain in the no charge band that people are able to get. And just remember, one of the key things about the discount combined with the standard is, yes, it's about lowering upfront price for the cleanest vehicles for consumers, but it's about sending a strong signal into the market to encourage importers to go out there and work to get the cleanest stock that they can into the country at a reasonable price. And so actually one of the effects of these changes is that we will see over time more vehicles coming in at a reasonable price for people to buy. Without it, there would be fewer options for lower income and middle income households to get. Finally, the thing I'd say on this is, remember, we've had the analysis done on this scheme based on schemes internationally. This is a progressive scheme. Overall, by getting more clean stock into the country, which cycles through the market, we save low and middle income families heaps of money in terms of the ongoing running costs of their vehicles.
Mm-hmm. Just again, want to just mention to go back to you and discuss. You said there that there are still options in that market for family-sized vehicles. The stuff we've looked at that really still comes in without a fee bait on it is things like Toyota Sientas, which are the way 7 seats, but they're absolutely tiny vehicles, really unsuited for any family use in New Zealand. I mean, who's advising you on what's available? Because sometimes and I know we had this issue around discussions around all these electric utes that were supposedly on the way when this program originally came in. Who's providing this advice? Because it doesn't seem to actually align with what's entering the market. We're 2 years on now. There's one electric ute and it's stripped largely of safety features to get under the $80,000 limit.
Yeah. Look, the advice I receive comes from a range of sources, obviously the officials who support this work, but also I have my ongoing regular engagement with players in the market as well.
Go on, David. Go on.
Yeah, so look, FAIR and the Motor Industry Association have been on one side of this, which is it's going to take time and there's a lack of availability, etc., etc. Then you got some ginger groups out there, quite a few of them, Drive Electric being one of them, which are quite close to the minister, and officials who probably are just starting to, I've sensed in 2023, are starting to understand industry timelines. But up till 2023, they were just woeful, in my view, in the advice that was being provided to the minister. Overly optimistic, didn't understand availability. Factories, in the new vehicle sector, there are factories that supply vehicles to this part of the country made for the Australasian market, the linkage for the Australian market, all of those sorts of things really just haven't had the level of understanding that we would expect, nor have they been asking the right questions. There has been a preference for some officials to be incredibly picky and choosy with the information and only take the information forward that suits their narrative rather than a free and frank analysis of opportunities and constraints. So no, we don't think the minister's been getting overall good advice. But we do detect that the minister started to listen to FAIR and MIA more than he has in the past. Is it good enough? No, he's got to do a lot better.
Well, I think this is one thing to unpack from the comment he made was he's listening to the officials that support it. So that would say that there's an awful lot of officials in the background that don't, but he's just not going to listen to them. And
Treasury.
That's been actually a common theme, and I don't mean to make this political, but one of the common complaints laid against the current government and administration is that they have been famous for not listening to the advice that has been given to them by their officials, and that the politicisation of the officials and departments that are there to give them, would imagine, to give them free and frank advice, that dynamic has changed considerably over the last 4 or 5 years. And we end up with this sort of process of decision making where it sounds to me, and I'm really sorry if you're involved with this in Wellington, a bunch of yes men answering to a minister that says, this is the outcome I want, go away and find the results to make it happen. And also somebody somewhere in the woods there doesn't like Toyota very much.
I actually see it differently. I don't think that there's yes men. I think that the minister is quite genuinely understanding some of these issues, but I think that he has some people behind him who have very firm ideals on what they want to see. And it's hard for the minister to make correct decisions, to make balanced decisions when he's being fed information that isn't necessarily accurate or is coming in from a slanted perspective.
So garbage in, garbage out, right?
And look, when he gets around the cabinet table, ministers like David Parker have always had a consistent philosophy that don't believe industry, just drive them hard and they'll change. So some of his cabinet discussions, he's probably tried to make sense from an industry perspective, but has not had the ability to persuade his colleagues. So there are a number of factors at play, but yes, there are other people advising the minister who just believe it can be done, who don't understand the whole importer dynamics and logistics and constraints that we operate under.
Let's just finish the last couple of seconds of this. No worries. Now, I thank you very much. I understand you do have to go. And thanks for answering those questions.
Yeah, thanks, Richard. Appreciate it.
Right. So, look, my little thing of that is, I mean, I'm still disappointed in some of the answers, but I came away from that interview actually feeling like Minister Wood was a little more sympathetic to the industry than perhaps I thought. I think he obviously came into some constraints on this. And I guess that's the way government works. And good credit to him for, he always knew he was going to be coming into a bit of a hostile crowd by doing an interview with a automotive industry outlet. Good on him for doing it. What do you guys take on what was said?
I guess good on him for a start, and that's more than we sometimes get. I think the overall industry sentiment is the scheme itself isn't a bad thing. I don't think anyone disagrees that the scheme as it is, we've got it, we're going to work with it. Once it's in place, forget about what's happened in the past, we've got a scheme. It's just the way that the implementation at this stage has taken place. First of all, we all had a gripe with the way it was put forward with the time frame, and that was against industry advice. It seems to me we're always up against issues with implementation rather than the schemes themselves. And this is yet again a classic case where industry, I'm sure, is prepared to work with the minister and officials to make a smooth transition to ultimately achieve the ideals that are set out in this framework. But they're just not listening to the people that can actually make those changes happen. And it seems to be the consistent problem with these schemes is not the scheme itself, but the implementation.
David, your final thoughts on it?
The minister is clearly listening to industry more, but industry has some way to go to get, I think, a fair hearing. But he is understanding issues better than he has in the past, and I don't think that he is solely relying on advice from the Ministry of Transport like he did initially. So there is hope there. It'll be really interesting to see what happens once we get into an election and see what the new government makeup is going to be. Because that's where I think from an industry perspective, post the election, the choices that we appear to be facing at the moment are going to be dramatic. No matter which side gets in, there's going to be big changes.
And let's be clear. Well, National have said a few things about what they're going to do. We haven't seen any details on what that actually mean, and I don't necessarily think that just the outright dumping of the CCD is necessarily a good way to go for the industry, full stop, either.
It's got to be phased out.
Yeah.
There's the old saying, while in opposition, you can say what you like, because it doesn't matter.
And I think I noted it in last week's podcast, and I haven't seen a similar thing from National because they still haven't released their policies yet, but dropping the CCD is not in ACT's plan for their first 90 days as part of their election plans. So that's an interesting move. Perhaps that means that they are being a little bit pragmatic and realise that it's not going to happen overnight. So we'll see. Anyway, look, thank you very much to Minister Wood for joining us on that. You can read a full write-up of that in the latest AutoTalk magazine out today. And thank you, Graeme, for joining us again. And thank you, David, for making yourself available. Now you are retired and in no way representing the MIA in your old position.
Thank you, gents.
No
Thank
worries.
you.
Catch you later.